Welcome, everyone. My name is Amherst Williams. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut League of History Organizations, and I want to thank you for being here today with us as we talk about the results of our latest survey on the impact of the coronavirus on our community. I want to just say, for those of you who are coming in, if you're not speaking, please be sure to mute yourself. And we will, basically the lineup today is I'm going to hand things over to our colleagues at Connecticut Humanities who are going to say a few words. And then I'll walk through a little presentation of the major findings from our most recent survey. And then we want to open things up to conversation and discussion. If you haven't had a chance already, please feel free to introduce yourself to the group in the chat, say who you are and where you're coming from. And we can also use the chat to field questions. If you're calling in on the phone, there'll be an opportunity later on for a more general discussion, and you're welcome to unmute yourself or otherwise raise your hand then if you'd like to speak. With no further ado, I want to introduce my colleague, Scott Wands, who is the Manager of Grants and Programs at Connecticut Humanities, who's going to say a few words now. Scott.
Thank you, Amherst. And first of all, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of what I know is busy schedules to join us today. We've been working closely with Amherst and the League since the pandemic started. I want to thank everyone that filled out either one or both of the surveys that we sent out, because that information has really been helping both us at Connecticut Humanities and Amherst and the programming that they're doing at the Connecticut League. And you'll hear more about the survey results from survey number 2 today, but do know that behind the scenes, we're using this as advocacy to work on both federal, state, and foundation support for additional funding that will be coming out to organizations in need. It's been influencing the programming that Amherst has done in ways that she'll talk about. And I hope that these are going to be results that you all will find helpful to communicate the impact that this has had on our state to your constituents, whether it be your staff, your board, funders that you want to reach out to. We know this has been a difficult time, and just know that on behalf of all of us at Connecticut Humanities and the Connecticut League, we're aware of this, and we're doing all that we can to try to keep finding ways to help you all out. So as Amherst was saying, this is going to be hopefully a split today between giving you some information and facts and then having a conversation and answering any questions that you have about the survey or otherwise. And I know our director, Dr. Jason Mancini, is going to be joining us at some point, but we are actively working right now on some the scenes to try to get some additional funding from sources that hopefully we'll be able to talk about in the coming days and weeks here. So he's on a couple other calls today and is going to join us when he can. And Amherst, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure, thanks, Scott. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out why Zoom is not showing me. Let me just toggle something here. Scott, for some reason, it just spotlights you all of the time, and I'm not really sure why, but that's okay. One of the things that I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to, and I think that Jason's going to say a few more words about when he gets here, is that yesterday the governor announced a new grant opportunity for small businesses and nonprofits in Connecticut. There are certain eligibility requirements, but many of your organizations may be eligible for these new grant funds. It's basically going to be like $5,000, and they're looking at a very quick timeline, I think, on this. Both Connecticut Humanities and CLHO have both put out an e-blast about this new program, and I'll pop a link in the chat to more information about it. As Scott suggested, this is something that's moving very quickly, but we did want to make sure that you all were aware about this new opportunity for state of Connecticut small businesses and certain nonprofits. So just in case there's more money that could come your way with not too many hurdles, hopefully.
Yeah, we're still learning about all the intricacies of it ourselves. The hope is that there'll be a joint CTH and CLHO webinar in the not too distant future that will talk about this and some of the other new funding opportunities that have come available. and get the right representatives from organizations to answer any questions that you have. And we know it's confusing. We know that funding is coming through a number of organizations, not the least of which is us at Connecticut Humanities. We know that there are questions about, if I got this source of funding, am I eligible for that source of funding? And I don't have all the answers right now, but we're going to try to find ways to get you the answers. But for this one that came out yesterday, it looks like one that many of the league's members might be more eligible for than not. It's for smaller organizations that have less than 20 full-time equivalent staff members that have had a negative impact on their finances due to COVID. So that's something to look at. You can look at the DECD website for more information. And like Amber said, we'll put the link in the chat here about that.
Yeah, there we go. Let me just do that right now, because I think I still have it up in the tab for this morning. Okay, so what we wanted to do today, as many of you may recall, we issued a couple of surveys. The first one went out in April, and the second one went out over the summer, just to get a sense of how things are doing in our cultural heritage community and the influence that the pandemic has had on our organizations. So we gathered results. We had about 178 respondents for our second follow-up survey over the summer. And I just wanted to share some of the major findings from that survey. So I'll go through these relatively quickly, and then we can open things up to a larger conversation. Okay. Let's screen this. Okay. So, we had 178 respondents to the survey, and they represented a swath of the Connecticut arts and culture sector. The majority, over half, were history institutions of some kind or another. In general, we asked, our first question was really about how things are doing. Are you doing better, worse, or just about the same as you were back in April when we sent out our first survey? And the good news is that most of our respondents said that things were generally the same or better. So the worst category was it was less than a quarter of the respondents. That said, you know, there are people out there who are hurting and are not doing as well as they were earlier in the year. And that's important for us to know about. But I think it's generally heartening to know that most people are feeling, if not better, at least not horribly worse than they were back in April.
This is the "are you an optimist or a pessimist" kind of slide, though, because if you're the optimist like Amaris, you say that over half are better or the same. If you're the pessimist, then it's either half or the same or worse, and depending on how you view the same at the time of April when the sky was falling, really, at least things aren't getting dramatically worse, and we don't have a higher percentage of worse here.
Good point, Scott. It's all in how you frame your data, right? That said, there are some pretty sobering numbers when we look at what's happened to the workforce in our sector. And so we asked people to compare the number of full-time and part-time positions at their institution in March and when they were filling out the survey. And also to compare the number of volunteer hours they could sort of rely on every month. And we found that over the course of that period, 192 full-time positions had been lost, as well as 208 part-time positions. And this is, you know, basically comes out to more than one full-time and one part-time position for each town in Connecticut. So that is a lot of job loss across our state. And this is, you know, we only had 178 responses, so this isn't necessarily a complete picture, but it gives a suggestion of the workforce impact that COVID has had on our sector. I know that we've talked about this in other colleague circles as well. Volunteer hours are really important to organizations across the state of Connecticut. Many of you don't have paid staff. You work at all volunteer organizations, and it's volunteers who really make things happen, whether it's board members, whether it's people you rely on at organizations that have paid staff who come in and help with programs, or who are docents in your institution. And the loss of those volunteer hours, whether you know, simply for quarantine reasons or for concerns about health in returning to organizations that may be open, have an enormous impact as well. Another piece, I think, of good news is that our sector has really embraced digital offerings, and everybody dived in and, you know, really tried to figure this out. Certainly it's not everybody, but more than 3/4 of the organizations we surveyed had experimented with digital programs of one kind or another. And in some of the more anecdotal parts of the survey where people were sharing things that they were proud of, a lot of these were, you know, some of their new offerings in terms of digital and remote programming that they were kind of, you know, forced to be creative about. And it ended up being things that I think they want to continue after the pandemic as well. So I think in some ways there have been some positive results in terms of you know, pushing people to try out new things and perhaps engage with new audience as a result. So I've definitely heard some anecdotal you know, evidence that this has been a good outcome in some ways for some organizations. Although, you know, it is important to realize that there's a percentage of organizations who haven't had the capacity to offer these sorts of programs. And that's something that we want to dive into a little bit more deeply. Scott?
This is definitely something that we've seen a lot of here at Connecticut Humanities and the project grants that we've received as well. And I think our field should be proud of the nimbleness by and large that we've been able to do. There have been other fields that haven't been able to open or continue to serve audiences in quite the same way. But the history culture community here in Connecticut from very early on started to find ways to continue to deliver programs, share exhibits, in some cases exhibits that opened a week or two before the shutdown happened, and take that content, which they had never delivered in an online way, very successfully. So I think this is something that we should all, and many of us on this call have been a part of doing that, be proud of the way we've been able to pivot so strongly.
Yeah. And I will say this, you know, this is a question that doesn't necessarily capture other kinds of pivots that organizations have made. For instance, doing more traditional, you know, brick and mortar-y kinds of exhibits, but moving them outside to an outdoor space, for instance. Which brings me to the next slide, which deals with how people have been approaching the reopening process. About half of the people who responded to the survey reported being open in some way, including indoor visitation or outdoor events and offerings. So that's included in that 49.6% open that you see there. And over a third were offering digital programs either instead or in addition. So this is in some ways a greater than 100% donut chart here. It's a pretty small percentage of people who were not able to engage their audiences through either mode, but it seems to suggest that there has been a lot of a kind of hybrid approach as well. For those organizations who are not yet open to the public, there's a lot of uncertainty about when they were thinking about reopening. I think this is a pretty revealing chart as well. Over half really had no idea when they were planning on reopening again. And I think that gives a real sense of the uncertainty that's out there in the community about when it is safe to reopen. About a third of organizations who weren't yet open were looking to next year to do it. It was really a small percentage who are planning to open this fall. Lastly, and this should come as no surprise, but it is good to have data behind it, financial concerns really top the list of things that people were worried about most. I did a quick coding on the data from this question and just to think about you know, what sorts of categories of concerns and finances, whether it was, you know, will we have enough money to operate in a few months versus, you know, ongoing concerns about how do we monetize these new digital offerings and turn them into the same kinds of revenue we were getting in terms of stuff at the gate or programs in person. The next top concern had to do with safety, safety of visitors and safety of staff and volunteers on the site during the pandemic. And it was really, other concerns were a small fraction of these. I think that, really finances and safety topped the list by a landslide. And those are really the main findings from the survey as well. We had people share some excellent things that they were proud of and projects that we were working on. And, I would invite people who want to share a little bit and, give yourselves a pat on the back for some of the ways that you have handled this situation as well. I'd invite you to share that in the chat or in a comment to us. And I do want to take this moment to really, emphasize that I think that there have been some really wonderful responses from organizations across the spectrum, from small organizations to large, and how you folks have met the challenge of this moment. So kudos to all of you for your creativity and bravery in continuing to connect with people. That's all I've got to say.
I want to answer a quick question that came up in the chat. So Mary Beth at Wallingford Historic Preservation Trust was asking if you received CARES Act funds from Connecticut Humanities through the grants that we made this summer with funds that we received through the National Endowment for the Humanities, if that would allow you to apply for those $5,000 small business and nonprofit grants that the state announced yesterday. I want to get an official reading on this, but my quick reading of things says that you should be able to apply for the state funding, because the way the exclusion reads is businesses and nonprofits may not participate in this program if they received another assistance grant from state of Connecticut coronavirus recovery funds. And the funds that we granted out at Connecticut Humanities were not state coronavirus recovery funds. But I believe that if you got some other small business loan from the state of Connecticut with funds that they got from the Coronavirus CARES Act, or you were an arts entity and are eligible for that $9 million of funding they announced, or their library through library funding, any of those other state-run programs funded with state funding would preclude you from going at this opportunity. And again, I want to get 100% confirmation, but the way I read it is because our funds were not ever touched by the state, did not go through the state, they went through the National Endowment for the Humanities. You should be able to both receive the funds that we granted out and apply for this opportunity. Sorry, Amherst, I just wanted to, I know that was a big one that was in the chat there. That's
fine. And I just, I'd like to take a moment to open things up now. If you are, if you've got your video and want to kind of come into our Brady Bunch gallery here, I'd invite you to turn on your video, and I'd like to really turn this into a conversation about what's going on with you right now, because I think these results are revealing and they're definitely important. But this is a survey that is a couple of months old at this point. It's October. It's almost the end of October now, if you can believe it. We're really seeing this as an opportunity to connect with you. I will say that the results of the survey have been really important for the advocacy work that especially the folks at Connecticut Humanities have been doing on behalf of organizations in our sector, and in the conversations that they're having right now with the governor's office and others at the state level about funds that may be available to our sector. So to all of those of you who responded to the survey, this is why we ask you these questions. And thank you very much for taking the time to respond and share, because the numbers help us do work and hopefully do work on your behalf.
And know that we are working, like I said, at the federal level with getting information to our state delegation about potential recovery efforts that are going to come out of Washington. And I know, as you all know and follow the news, the timing of that before or after election, what it will look like, what it will include, all still very much up in the air, but we have been able to share results from this survey with a number of our Connecticut delegation, both at the House and Senate level. We're working on the state, as Amherst was saying. We know that the funding that's come out over the last week especially has helped the libraries, large presenting arts organizations, and that $5,000 opportunity should help a lot of smaller organizations to mid-sized organizations, but it doesn't help everybody. And there's still more help needed. So we're working on trying to see what additional assistance the state might be able to provide, and as well as other funders on a statewide or more regional level. And one example of that is the humanities relief grants that are open right now that were funded by CHFA, which is the Connecticut Health and Education Facilities Authority. That's information which is available on our website. We'll get the link up here. This is a unique opportunity that's a partnership with us in the Office of the Arts. It's the first time that we've really done a partnership granting opportunity with them. We have a letter of intent, which is the first time we've done that. That's due November 2nd. And the reason we've done that is this is a opportunity we're really looking to give funding out in this grant line for organizations that do both arts and humanities programming that are serving diverse audiences in their community and working with Black, Indigenous, people of color to tell their community stories. And we don't want organizations that are not really meeting those criteria to spend a lot of time on an application if they're not having a high likelihood of being successful there. So if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer it either during this talk or more offline. But that's another opportunity that's available for $5,000 worth of assistance if you think you meet that intersection of things I was just talking about.
And I'll pop a link to that opportunity in the chat as well. So like I said, I'd like to, if you're on your computer, I'd like to invite you to, open up your video. If you have a question, it looks like we have one from Anne, so I'll start with that. But please, let's have a chat here.
Yeah.
So Anne at the Unionville Museum. Hi, Anne. It doesn't have a micro camera, but wanted to share what they had done to put an exhibit online and had a great response. And now they're planning on doing an online version of all their exhibits. They've been posting photos from their collection on local Facebook groups, and that has really led to a lot of engagement with the community, sharing memories and experiences of growing up in Unionville. Way to go, Anne.
I know a number of organizations on this chat here, as I'm waiting for some more comments to come in, have done a great job with putting their exhibits online. And several of you have gotten grants from us. If you've got any tips or things to share with others, feel free to put that in the comments too, because we're all very much learning here. And so the programs that the League has been doing especially have great opportunities for people to have conversations and share what they've had for successes and how they've learned along the way.
All right, we did something a little bit different at Blue Slope. We decided to do outdoor programming. And so we contacted ARC and some moms groups and some homeschoolers groups. So what we did was like our older homeschooler group, we did food storage then and now, and we brought our things outside. So everybody was outside with face masks, socially distanced, and they learned about the older homeschoolers learned about food storage then and now. For the moms groups and the younger homeschoolers groups, we're at Agricultural Museum. So we went around to the vegetable gardens. We talked all about how beneficial spiders and certain insects were. We actually did colors and flowers all around our museum. We did animal homes and the beneficial animals and animals that really kind of are not beneficial to farmers. And so we've done all of those. We do a fact, we do a book reading, we do a walk, and we do a craft. And it's kind of like, it's a very broad craft, very broad craft. And we've gotten really good response out of that. And so that's what we've been doing. So if you have a little bit of space, we've just stopped that now because it's going to start to get really cold weather. And so we're stopping that, and we'll start it up in the spring. And it brought in income. And that was important for us, was to bring in income. So.
That's great, Anne.
Thanks, Anne. We have a question also from Rebecca Tabor-Conover about what people's successes have been with doing school programs virtually, and that ever-present question, have you been able to monetize those visits? So if anyone has any experiences to share on that front, we'd love to hear about them.
All right, well, I'm gonna see.
Go ahead, Lori's got something to say.
Hey.
Oh, All right, Lori.
So quick question, and this kind of goes into more grants. I'm happy to talk about ed programs and distance learning. But Scott, I'm curious with Connecticut Humanities, I know there's a lot of these special grant lines coming in, but in your traditional grant opportunities, whether capacity building or quick grants or anything else, do you see any changes or upcoming spring things that we should be on the lookout for?
So I think the biggest, and thanks Lori for asking that. The biggest thing is we made some changes early on that are going to stay on. So for our quick grants, while we're going to be continuing to fund the types of activities that quick grants have historically done, we're allowing organizations to request funds for staffing, which is something that we historically did not do with quick grants. So at least through June 30th of 2021, through the end of our fiscal year, your quick grant request to us can include up to the full amount, $4,999, going towards staff members working on a project. That's always been allowed as a match. This will be the first time this year that quick grants have allowed it to be used for some of our funds. We are getting back to some of our grant lines as normal. We had canceled our November big grants deadline for planning, implementation, and capacity, and used that money to make additional relief grants or quick grants for organizations pivoting their programs in the first quarter. But our large grants will be back as usual for our April deadline for projects happening July 1st onward. And those grant lines will be opening up application in the next couple of weeks here. I did want to ask if Heather from NEMA might say a couple of words here. There's an exciting opportunity going on right now. Their conference is coming up, and there are some scholarships available. And I was hoping she might talk about that and get more folks from Connecticut to be applying to go to NEMA for free or for discount this fall.
Thanks, Scott. You just did all the work for me. That's great. I just want to say thank you to Amory's and Scott and definitely Connecticut Humanities and Connecticut League for all the work that you guys have been doing down in Connecticut. We really appreciate that, especially the advocacy arm. It's always incredibly helpful to have that type of information going into talking to people that hold the money. So I do appreciate that one. But on to our conference. As many of you guys know, we are going virtual like everything else, everybody else is doing. So our conference is going to be virtually November 16th to the 20th. We do have some pretty discounted rates to attend. It's $140 for members of Connecticut League and NEMA. But we also have a ton of scholarships. So definitely apply for the scholarships. We want to thank Scott Wans and Connecticut Humanities for funding that part of the conference. Thank you, Amory's, putting that in there. On that one, the scholarships, in all honesty, we ask 3 additional questions on the registration form, and you get a free conference registration. I didn't say that, don't tell anybody else, but yes, you get a free conference registration if you answer 2 additional questions. So feel free to pop over to the NEMA website. Our early bird deadline and also the scholarship deadline is the 23rd. So keep that in mind. And I just want to say thanks. If anybody does have any questions about that one, to definitely give us a call on that one. And then I did have a question from Scott and Avery's on this one. NEMA, we did a survey earlier in the season about the COVID impact. We've decided to hold off on following up with another survey because the Massachusetts Cultural Council is also doing a survey right now, and also AAM. So we didn't want to step on any toes because we also know how survey fatigue happens. I think that's it for me, unless anybody has any additional questions.
But I want to thank you, Heather, and Dan, and all the staff at NEMA for all the great work that you're doing on behalf of all of our museum community for all of New England. That survey is great to get the data that you've already gotten. And I know we've utilized that here in Connecticut. But please, all of you on the chat with us today, if you have ever attended NEMA, if you were thinking about NEMA, this is a great year to do it, especially with it being virtual. You don't have to travel. You can get some great content from home for you if you've got colleagues at a rate that you've never had the opportunity before, free. If you go and you apply for a scholarship by Friday, we helped support NEMA this year to be able to make sure that this was not one more burden for organizations that are overburdened already, and get as many folks from Connecticut to be a part of this conference. So don't let this opportunity get you by it. hopefully we'll never be here again because we're gonna go back to normal next year with.
Yeah, I want to go back to Newport. I should mention that if you're thinking that a week-long conference is a long time, you will have the opportunity to, for up to 3 months, actually go back and watch the recordings. So it's not like you have to sit in front of your computer for the entire week. There is an opportunity to go back to it. So we are recording the sessions and stuff. But thanks, you guys.
Thank you,
Great.
Heather.
Thanks, Heather. I don't know if you have anything else to say on how some of the, what kind of the general trends were in New England in your own findings that might be useful to folks who are here on this call today.
It's been a while since I've looked at the survey, so
okay,
I'm
that's fine.
sorry about that one. Right now, I will admit, right now I'm actually working on the salary survey that we did last fall, so we should be releasing that in the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Fantastic, thank you.
And for those of you who aren't aware, NEMA for years and years has been doing an annual salary survey to help figure out what different positions throughout the museum field pay as kind of a medium, and then they do it by subject area, history museums versus historical societies versus art museums. And it's a great way to look at benchmark of what different positions are paying out as you are maybe posting a position. And, you know, there's work to be done as the whole field in driving up salaries, and salary surveys really only tell you what the average of the things are and not where we want to go. But it's a very important tool that we should all be aware of, and knowing what your peer institutions across New England pay for similar type performances.
Thanks, Scott.
Other questions or comments? We have one I see in the side over here from Ann talking about the Salmon Brook Historical Society and some of the great work that they've done with some outside strolls through Granby. And I had seen some stuff about that online as well, creating opportunities for you to learn more about your community through walking around, learning, and getting more information on your cell phone, I believe through QR codes in the case of Salmon Brook.
We have a few people who are calling in on the phone as well. And I want to just take this opportunity, since they don't have the capacity for the chat. We've got 203-246-3740. You have anything you want to ask or say? There's another 203 number here.
Amaris?
Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say this summer, we were able to do outdoor programming. We did our farmers market at the old State House. And then we were able to, after we delayed the start of our concert series by a couple of weeks, and we found that people were just so happy to be outside and have something to do. And we really, excuse me, we had a few issues with people perhaps not wanting to wear a mask, but for the most part, people were super good. But so many of the performers, we had about 11 or 12 groups this summer, they kept thanking us and thanking us. They're like, we haven't done a gig all, you know, since the winter. They were so happy to have that opportunity. So it's really been great to be able to do that. And you know, one thing I think, kind of going back to something you had said, which is the positive in this, and I'm kind of the glass half full type of person too, is that it really forced us to do things virtually. And so with our concerts, we actually broadcast them live on Facebook. And that's something we would have never thought to do. And yet it was really nice. We got a good, it really expanded our ability to get out to people. And we found with public programs, sometimes, you know, we've created 2 new kinds of program themes within our network at the old State House. And you can get speakers who you'd never be able to afford to fly into Connecticut, who are like, yeah, I'll Zoom in, you know, no problem.
And Rebecca, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I think a lot of people on this call know you as Ms. History Day Connecticut in many ways. And I want to, first of all, you know, congratulate you and your team on being one of the early History Day providers across the country to really pivot and create a online contests last year and keep the program running. What kind of things are going on right now that people on the chat might want to know about, and how could they be getting involved with History Day at this time? What's the greatest?
Well, thanks, Scott. As you know, I never turned down an opportunity to recruit judges. And we definitely will need judges. But for History Day, yeah, it really has been quite a crazy year, hasn't it? Because we had to, within a week, pivot and offer our contests online. And I have to say that National History Day in general was one of the few academic programs that kept going. And I heard at the end of the year from so many parents and teachers and students how much they appreciated that, because it was a beacon of normalcy in their lives. You know, I think this year, teachers are under so much pressure. I sadly anticipate our numbers going down just because I think teachers are at max. But kind of speaking of the glass half full, as I was, we are doing virtual workshops. And so Friday we're doing an educator's workshop. I have people joining me, colleagues joining me from Georgia and the national office down in Maryland. And we are willing to go to classrooms virtually. We've created, virtual workshops. I'm doing my first tomorrow. So wish me luck, because that's a little nerve-wracking. But then the other thing that both we, Connecticut History Day and National History Day, have spent time doing is really creating content for teachers who are teaching in a hybrid model. So like I did a video and a hyperlinked worksheet that helps teachers direct students how to find a Connecticut topic, because we always do try to push that local history, getting our students to use your resources in the community. That's really always a big focus that we have. And so we're trying to create more content. And if you're on this call and you have an idea, because I know many of you have judged for us, if you have an idea for something that you think would be helpful for teachers, or you'd be willing to do, please reach out to me and let me know. We haven't made the final call about the contest yet, but it's looking, I think the chances are it's going to be virtual just because of the way the world is. I don't, our judges, we have so many people we need to keep safe in the History Day world, students and judges and teachers. But the good thing is this year we're going into things prepared, that, it's not turning on a dime and figuring it, like you're figuring it out as you go. We're going in much better prepared. So
Rebecca, I put your email address in the chat here, but if—
Oh, thank you.
If folks want to be judges, and I know that's later on in the process, or they have schools that they think they might want to learn more about History Day and become a school for the first time if your town's not doing it, Rebecca's a great person to talk to and answer any questions, and love to have more communities across the state and more schools participate in the program.
And I think, in terms of what's going on with schools being hybrid or virtual, project-based learning is the way to go. And I think all of us would agree, we believe in that. And so a History Day project is exactly that. It's project-based learning. And so, there are a lot of resources for teachers to utilize. So, and if you're out there and you think, wow, maybe I'd like to learn more about History Day, feel free to join us for our educators workshop on Friday, because we'll have teachers, we'll have coordinators there, all kinds of folks. So we'd love to see you there.
Thank you, Rebecca.
No problem. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, and if you have a link to information about that workshop and want to pop it in the chat, Rebecca, please go ahead and do it. Be
glad to.
Yeah. We'll also be focusing on the classroom, and our program on Friday at 1 is part 2 of our Interpreting Slavery at Connecticut Museums and Historic Sites. So I'll pop a link to that in the chat as well.
And I just put a link in. We have a website that my colleague Greg maintains, which is called teachatct.org, which is lesson prompts to help take history and turn it into materials that teachers can bring into the classroom. If there are other similar kinds of content that you think might be a good fit for that you have, let my colleague Greg Mangan know. And we're trying to build out content there. And we've actually got some grants pending to build out new Teach It content in this time of high need for this, for the state and for the teachers and our students. And we've got some other links. We've got the League event now in the chat from Amherst. We've got History Day educator workshops from Rebecca. And we also have, there was another one here about the most recent issue of NEMA in their NEMA Net summer issue. with futures post-COVID for museums. So lots of fun links here in the chat, and we do always capture the chat as well. So I think this is something that we can capture and share afterwards, Amherst, or am I talking on a turn?
Well, that's
okay. Fine. Lori is also asking from Fairfield Museum. Well, she talks about her session there and an exhibit PAG lunch, which is an opportunity for people to do exhibits to get together and talk and share at the same time. But I was wondering if anyone else is presenting. So if others are presenting at NEMA, do put your session in the chat and feel free to give a plug. Other thoughts or questions? Or Lori's talking, so I'll let Lori
Hey,
talk.
I'm always happy to chat. So we did have the question before about people charging for school programs and costs and revenue. For many of us, school programs are, of course, an important source of revenue for our organizations. I think right now it's really challenging to put a price on something that's virtual, especially with teachers not being able to necessarily either go live with you or use resources in particular. At the Fairfield Museum, we're developing a distance learning platform with our technology partner who is called Culture Connect. They're based in New York City. There's all sorts of options that they've helped us provide, and many thanks to Connecticut Humanities who are helping us fund this digital platform. Thanks, Scott and Jason and everybody at CTH. But for us, it's going to give us all of those options, whether it's live or in person or virtual or resources or activities. And it's also going to give kids the opportunity to explore on their own. Right now, we're committed to providing this for 2 grades in the town of Fairfield and beyond. But we're looking at building basically an app where we can extend those experiences to all grade levels. We've found that in Fairfield and beyond that we're opening up a lot more conversations with middle school and high school students and teachers who were really looking for social studies and civics resources right now, especially about more of our social history and understanding local culture. And so we're overloaded with education requests right now. So anything that we can put online for teachers, they're just so thankful and they're exhausted, and like many of us. And so we're kind of having the conversation about putting things behind price barriers, but keeping it very affordable and based on experience and really based on our time. And so access is one thing, live video is another. And so those are 2 different price points for us.
And I think this is the $20,000 question is, you know, we know how to count heads and monetize your door. How to monetize and what the right price point is and what's too little and what's too much for online is something I think we're all learning here. So if other people have thoughts and experiences that they want to share on that front, feel free to jump into the discussion or put stuff in the chat as well.
Last week, I attended a NEMA executive director's discussion with folks around the region, just to talk with some other folks, mostly from museums. And I just wanted to share a couple of the things that people have been talking about at that. I think that, you know, a lot of the conversation was how people are doing in, you know, the time of the pandemic and how they're sort of thinking about the future. And it seems that while people have really embraced the outdoor spaces, there are a lot of people who aren't really in a huge rush to come together in person indoors just yet. So a lot of folks were saying, you know, use your outdoor spaces as long as people will keep coming, you know, as long as you can. And that really the planning around this is not going to be a matter of months, but really thinking years down the line. I think a lot of museum leaders in the region are really thinking in that way. Some neat ideas that came out of that, the creative stuff that people are doing to keep engaged with the community. One museum had partnered with a local farm that was doing a CSA, and were putting history inserts in CSA boxes. I think this was a historical society in a town in Vermont. and doing a lot of collaborating with other organizations to remind people that they still exist and will still take donations. The ever-present question of how to keep the money coming in at this strange moment. Some people were trying out different media. The Egan Maritime Institute on Nantucket had started a podcast called Time and Tide that sounded really interesting that I wanted to check out. There were organizations that were playing around with corporate sponsorships as a model to help fund their programs. But a lot of people have had success with a sort of NPR fundraising approach, passing the hat, virtually at programs and saying, like offering things for free, but asking for money. We're doing this service. If you like what we're doing, give us some dollars. And that has been successful for a lot of people.
Just putting the chat here. I don't usually plug other institutions' fundraisers, but Mark Twain is an interesting one that some of you may have heard about because you pay money to go, and there's different reasons why you might want to do that. But there's a free opportunity to attend their gala, and their gala has a star-studded lineup, including musical performances. And this gets to, I think, an earlier point that someone was making, that distance is not an issue now for joining kind of programs and things like this. Jimmy Buffett and Brad Paisley are going to be playing. So I don't know how that's going to work out for them. I'm wondering if, because there's such a star-studded lineup, folks that would never spend $175 to do a ticket to a gala might log in and make a $5 contribution to the Mark Twain House. And how many $5 pickups can they get for something that's going to cost them nothing and get more eyes on the video screen for them? So it's just an interesting thing to know about and think about.
That's our hope. Hi, I'm Bridget. I'm from the Mark Twain House. So thank you for plugging and helping out. Yeah, but that's been one of our hopes with a lot of our virtual programming, both for adult audiences, but also for younger audiences too, is if we can make it accessible, if we can at least get people in the door, it makes that pass the hat, it makes the ask easier. And there are silver linings. Like, we are starting to do virtual educational programming, sort of like virtual field trips, and we're still in kind of like beta testing phase of how is this going to work, what pricing. And so we've kind of been working with schools and other organizations on a smaller scale, but we have one coming up with students from Oregon. This is a school that never would have, they cannot come on a regular field trip to the Mark Twain House, but they can right now. So, opening yourselves up, I think, is something that has been paying off for us, at least.
And that's a great point, Bridget, because I'm encouraging folks that are coming in for grants from us to think outside the box. We're so used to thinking, if I do this program, it will appeal to this type of audience, and I can market in these ways to get, in this limited geographic circle, folks to come. Well, those circles have been blown up because of the digital things that we're presenting. So how can you start to reach people that might be interested in, I was having this conversation with a library doing a World War I program series. Well, you don't have to just try to reach people that are veterans and interested in doing veterans topics that can drive to you from a half an hour or more out. How can you reach veterans groups in other parts of the state or other parts of New England or even beyond? Like, we're just talking other parts of the country. So I think thinking outside the box, especially if we start to find ways to monetize our online and digital activities, distance is not a factor, and you have a much wider group of people to draw from. Oh, Amherst, you're on mute.
Sorry, that's the story of 2020. Susie,
Yep.
Did you want to share a little bit more about your experiences at Lockwood Matthews? You mentioned in the chat that lectures and student programs have been free so far, but that you're questioning how long you can sustain that. But you've done a different thing with fundraisers, and that's worked pretty well for you. Would you care to share a little bit more?
Sure. We just had a gala, and we did really well with it. We charged $50 for attendance, and we were able to raise some money with corporate sponsors as well, and also small sponsorships, which we had not done in the past, of $1,000, and different individuals felt that they could sustain that, and so we were able to also sell a great number of ads in a virtual program. So we used a platform called Octria, and in addition to Zoom, and we had about 150 people attending, and a great speaker, and that raised enough money to sustain several free lectures and also student programs, which at the moment we are, we're not charging for any of that. So as I mentioned, I don't know how it will be next year and if we can continue sustaining the free access, but we're trying.
And that's the kind of stuff that maybe reaching out to a local organization or a bank is a great way to do. Kathy Fields out in Litchfield Historical has had great success in that before the pandemic, even about getting funding from a sponsor to make admission to the museum free for all year round. And it doesn't take a whole heck of a lot of money to surpass the gate revenue that many places in Connecticut see. And to make that kind of a contribution and give that sort of branding out to allow folks to keep their digital programs free or low cost might be something that we should be thinking about and trying to find a kind of an angel to put their name on it or be anonymous to allow us to monetize that in ways that doesn't pass it on to the end user. Got about 7 minutes left. So if there are other thoughts or questions from folks, now is the time to ask them either via the chat or unmute and put your video on and ask the group at large here. Yeah. Amherst, I know you talked a little bit about some of the other programs that are coming up, like the one this Friday. What are some other things that are in the works that maybe not posted yet that folks might want to be knowing there are coming from the League? Sure. So we're working on thinking about programs both for the fall and the spring. We're hoping to put together a little colleague circle, hopefully next month, kind of what happened to the suffrage centennial in the midst of all of this stuff in 2020, to talk a little bit about how that's been going in Connecticut. With some folks who've been involved with the commission and know a bit more about the efforts that have been going on across the state, because that still is a thing. We are hoping, as Scott said, to have something informational about some of these new funding opportunities that are coming out from the state. We're looking ahead to the spring. I mean, colleague circles are pretty flexible at this point. So one of the things that I would ask of all of you is if you have ideas, it seems like monetizing programs is something that that is a perennial question that I've heard come up at a number of these colleague circles. So, that may be something that we might want to think about having a conversation about that's more devoted to that. What's been working for people, have some folks share in a lineup and prompt another conversation around that. I'm trying to think. Our programs committee hasn't met yet, so we're still working on the details of other things. But I think what that means is that now's a great opportunity if you have ideas of some of the things that you'd like to see from the League. I mean, we're going to be going back to the survey data to look at that a little bit more closely and think about what might be useful to all of you. But if you have particular ideas, like you really want a training on X, shoot me an email, director@clho.org, and we'll put that in the queue for consideration. And for us at Connecticut Humanities, like I said, the Heritage Relief Grants that are funded from CHIFA have a November 2nd LOI deadline with a November 16th application deadline for those that move on to application stage. The next deadline for quick grants for us is coming up in February, and the first Friday of February, and then will be every month thereafter, February, April, and June. April is the next deadline for bigger grants, planning, implementation, and capacity. And as always, happy to talk offline about specific thoughts that you have. We not only help guide you to whether it's a good fit for an application, but then we'll read drafts of applications and give feedback to how you guys have the most successful path possible. And then there's another opportunity which we're on the cusp of being able to announce here. It's not a funding opportunity, but we received from funding that was available to state humanities councils to look at the election and civic life in America right now. And I've not gotten the 100% go clear to talk about it, but there'll be some exciting work coming out of things that are working with us, Connecticut Public, Connecticut Democracy Center, and Rebecca, and some other partners across the state, looking at voting pre and post election. So look for another announcement from us coming up in the next few weeks, hopefully, about that. All right. I think if there are no other questions, we can let people go a few minutes early here.
Sure. I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if anybody has anything they want to chat about. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop the recording, and I look forward to seeing you at our next colleague circle, or perhaps our program on Friday, or an upcoming event from the League.
Thanks, everybody. I'll hang around for a few moments as well. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks
Bridget. For being here. Thanks for talking a little bit about your project.
Sure. Thanks for plugging it.
Yeah, no.
See you later.
Oh, we got someone that registered for NEMA since we did this webinar, so yay!
Hey.
Hey, Lori.
You're not recording now. Oh, are we
No.
still recording? No.
No,
We're still
I tried